So Chaos in chat sent me actually two images. One of them was fan art from his or her Final Fantasy 14 character, which is great. But he also sent us this original character design. I decided to go with the original character design because I can truly comment on his abilities, because especially design wise, is important to when you send me like an art piece or your whole portfolio for a review. I'd say it's easier to point out flaws from a fundamental level on your original work, because, well, fan art, the design is already pretty much done unless you redesign it. But even then, so that's why I chose to go with this one out of the two. So the first thing that just before we were talking, you guys pointed out a few good points. One of them that also caught my mind initially is that there's too much detail. Now, here's overall, like, detail is not a bad thing. The issue with detail, when there's an overload of detail, is that nothing ever comes to focus. That is the number one reason as to why it's usually a problem when everything is just littered with detail and there's no space to rest. I'd say the only space to rest you have right now is the moon, which is, like classic moon behind the character. It always works, or for the most part. Now, detail should be considered, or especially in design, you should add detail where you want an eye to focus. Because if everything is full of detail, then nothing is in focus. It's not that it looks bad. That's not the issue. It's just that at some point it becomes noise and there's really like no interest to look at something. That's literally the only, or one of the main reasons why you want to avoid adding so much little, for example, when you're drawing the I'm gonna assume this is fur. If it's not fur and it's feathers, then both, either way, apply. But when you do all of these, instead of drawing you're doing something good. I'll tell you what you're doing good. You are separating, you even though it's in very small sections, you are separating clumps of hair or clumps of feathers, and that is a good thing. Your mind is in the right mindset. So what I would suggest is that you make it way bigger. So you have, like, this whole thing could be sectioned into 3 big major clumps, and then you can add detail. It's fine. You can make something look. You can add a lot of detail to something and still make it look sort of like not plain, but like simple. But a way to do it is, instead of having like, I'm not gonna count each one. But instead of having like a million like sectioned feathers or hair, I would just sort of like I would merge a lot of these together. Maybe that's a good description to it, or a good way to put it. Maybe I would merge like 80% of these and just leave 3 major sort of like separations in the render. And I'm talking about this section here, but just as an example. But what I just said applies to the things on the head, like the clouds in the background, for example. I like the patterns. I really, really do like the patterns. I feel like some of the issue also comes from, I often don't tend to stick to this, but this is a specific case where I feel like your render is not helping. Now, what I mean by that is that you're making everything very, very sharp as far as like, I'm assuming these are scales, right? Like an scaled armor. And the same goes here. I don't know if this is a scaled armor as well, like to the torso, but I feel like you could like you can still draw it individually if you want to. You should decrease the value so that it becomes less contrasty. Yeah, less contrast would help, because I can see that you're going in with a pencil. You're making like really sharp like lines. I would say that in this specific situation, it would help if you made it less contrasty by making your lines a lot lighter, your render a lot softer in the busier areas, because then you can mask the noise with some shading, so it still appears, you know, like, oh, this person is clearly wearing like a scale armor which has a lot of small pieces. I would recommend looking at he's a friend. I would recommend looking at Evan Amundsen. He does scales really well, and in general details, as far as like the noisiness, he controls it very, very, very well. I would recommend if one of you could type it in the chat, his name, and also give him a shout out because he streams. He's amazing. He's absolutely amazing. And there's plenty of other people. Yeah, Elisa Ivanova. There's plenty of people that do it well. So that is the main thing. There's other issues, but this is the main thing that stands out to me first. Now, the other issues is that, I mean, there's some rendering issues. I'm not really going to focus too much on it. I will touch on it briefly, but that is not your main problem. Obviously, there is some proportion issues. And I think this is something that you'll just have to just get better forehead. There's really no way to like help you. There's really no way for me to help you with proportions other than like do it for you. The only thing that I could think of is that, for example, one example of many is, for example, the ear. Where does the ear line up with the eye, or what is its size in comparison to like the nose or the lips or the eye or the overall head? For example, right now her head reads really big. I don't know if it's because of the helmet. I don't know if this is a helmet or everything is like almost like a turban. I don't know if that's how you say it, but I don't know if it's all just fabric or there's actually like a shell and then fabric on top. I don't know that, but either way, there is some proportion issues, there is some anatomy issues. That's something that it's normal. You're gonna keep practicing to it. I would highly recommend you work on, as far as anatomy goes, proportions seem to be your main issue, because I'm seeing right now you are doing what a lot of people do early on, myself included. I'd say that my biggest weakness, maybe looking at my portfolio, is not apparent because I work really hard on fixing it, but one of my biggest issues naturally is proportions, actually. So I know really a lot about this, and I can point out when someone has major proportion issues because I tend to naturally have them. It's just that I became really good at fixing them early on. And I think everyone has their own natural, like, you're something that you're naturally bad at, just the same way you're naturally good at something else, right? The way to fix it is to measure. Now, it's a bit boring. I mean, in the beginning it was a bit boring, but then once you start understanding, you have fun. It's just like in gaming. Art is pretty much like that, where in the beginning it's kind of like maybe even annoying to learn, but once you start getting one thing, you get excited because then you're starting to have fun, and then you learn the other thing, and then you get more and more and more excited, and you get better and better, and then eventually you just have fun all the time. I mean, I'm looking at this image. I think you had fun. If we're talking about that, it looks like you had a good time doing it. Like, not a lot of people would put time into doing all of this detail and stuff. Most people generally gets really bored. So that is a big plus to you. I think you're going to be doing great as an artist because you have one fundamental like a good thing, you know, like what do you call, like a, I guess a pro, right? Definitely your pro is patience, because I can tell you have a lot of patience. The con to you is again the detail. Mainly, you have to step back from that quite a lot and balance out. As far as detail goes, the way I would do it is you only add detail where you want the eye to focus, as I mentioned before, and you need empty spaces of shapes to breathe. I'll show you an example. For example, the arm. What really, like, I cannot stop looking at this arm because you have all of this detail here, all around, and then you have this big simple shape, this big opened and simple shape on her arm, and here on her forearm too. And now, because everything is detailed, that means that when something looks simple, it stands out. And obviously, I don't think you wanted the arm to be like a major focal point. I mean, I'm not saying this is the focal point, because the face is pretty like in a good way, it's pretty simple looking. So definitely the focus is still like the face, but like this arm here, I'm just looking at it all the time. So yeah, detail, proportions. So proportions is all about measuring. That's like it. And like size comparison and shape comparison in relation to one another. There's no correct, like, oh, an ear should be this tall and this wide. Like, that doesn't exist. Or maybe it does, but like in art, that would be extremely boring. You want to compare everything to everything. You compare the ear to the eye to the nose to the mouth to the I don't know, lower part of the face, or the head, the neck to the head. You know what I mean? You compare everything to everything. The head to the arm. And that's how you get better at proportion, is by constantly comparing things. Another point I want to touch up is design. General design. One thing you try to do good, I don't think it's because it's being very successful. In some areas it is, in some areas not. I'll point out the bad ones first. Design wise, you are trying to do good by adding some functionality to your designs, in places, in the very least. Like, for example, the arm, you have the straps that like these belts that show where you would tie the armor. However, this is, even though it's fantasy, I would avoid adding like the belted parts on the outside of the armor. Just think about it. If it's armor, right? Think about it in a give some common sense to your fantasy design. So, for example, let's say that's armor, and someone is gonna like try to slash her, you know, with a sword, and then she's gonna protect herself with like maybe her forearm. Now the sword is gonna cut on, like, it's gonna cut on the belts, and then the armor is off. For example, I'm just saying one of the few examples, right? So think about things like that. I would definitely not add straps on the top. Of course, like, maybe this is fashion souls. and maybe that's what you were going for. But I think that it is important to add, if you want to add belts on top, at least add some belts underneath, so that to show that, oh, it would still be stuck on her arm, even though the fashion items would still be cut or whatever, you know. I would definitely look into a lot more on functionality of design. That means like armor, you know, how clothing is fit. So where, for example, this simple shirt, this is a simple shirt, right? But like, you know, I'd say it's common sense that everyone knows that the sewing is around here, and then you have a sewing on the side, right? So the same goes to your character. Like on the side, it shows no sense of nothing being either stitched, nothing either being like put together. Since you added belts here, I would expect some more somewhere else, some functionality somewhere else. I don't see any on the torso, any on the arm. Another thing is that the design, generally speaking, the design feels a bit like the best way I could describe it is as if she bought each part of the design. She took it from like a different blacksmith or a different vendor. What I mean by that is that it looks a bit scrambled. You know, if you ever played WoW or any other MMO, even if you didn't, you know how it is when you put gear you put gear on and you look horrible because you have a shoulder pad from something else, from another different set, and then something else from another set, and you just look like sort of off. It's kind of like that. Looks like a leveling armor. Yeah, she's combining different armor sets. That's how it's looking like right now. And the way to fix that is shapes. Shapes are extremely important. Of course, material and color helps a lot, but the number one thing that makes the most difference is the shape. So for example, I'll show you what you did well. You have this little like this sperm looking, at least kind of this thing on her head, right? It has this sort of like subtle shape to it, this subtle curve to the headpiece thingy, right? What you did well is by adding some other elements to her, like weapons, and I'm not entirely sure what this is. Looks like an ocarina or something you'd play or whatever. But yeah, you've added the same sort of shape to like her weapon and the dagger, and you have these little like these things here. Reeds generally the same. Another way for you to make the armor more today I'm forgetting all the words. Feeling like everything belongs together. Another way is to repeat the same element throughout the rest of the character, right? So what that means is like, if this thing has like a gem on it here on the head, maybe you could add that gem like instead of these holes, unless there is a purpose to the holes, right? But you know, instead of having this I'm still not quite entirely sure what this is, but instead of having that, you can add some more cloth. You know, maybe she's fully wrapped in cloth. That's just one of like hundreds of options you could go with. But generally, taking one element and like distributing throughout the whole character tends to help with unifying, is the word I was looking for, the whole design, right? Now the elephant in the room. What the fuck is this? Is this a crow sword? What's happening? I'm just joking. Don't please don't be offended. I'm just joking. Like, this is not working for me at all. A crow bottle? I thought it was a crow sword. This is absolutely not working, and I'll tell you why. It's because there's no, like, I can't tell whether this is real. Like, it look right now. Maybe it's because of the render, or the area is a little too busy. Right now, it looks like she would be grasping or about to grasp something invisible, like an invisible handle. It's the gesture of her hand that is throwing me off. But looking at it closely, maybe let me zoom in. Oh wait, I could zoom in. It's a spell. I also thought it was a sculpture initially, but then her hand kind of looked like should be holding an like a invisible handle. But now zooming in, I can see there's a pendant. Okay, so major points of interest. They cannot be tiny. It just can't. I mean, the only reason why I even saw that this is what it is because I was able to zoom in. But you want to always have everything clear on a thumbnail size. Even if I looked at this character this small, actually I can't. Can I zoom out more? I can't. Fuck. But even if I made it really, really, really small, yeah, I can't zoom out more than this. We should still be able to tell what it is that she's holding. So, for example, this pendant would have to be way bigger, and the effect of the crows. I'm assuming that this is a summoning of crows. Yeah, she's summoning birds out of her hand. That kind of thing is now that I see that it's a pendant, I can tell that that might be the direction you wanted to take. You have way too many crows. That's the first thing. It goes back to the whole detailing, adding too much of the same like thing. Also, the way they're rendered, it is looking a bit like a sculpture. And the reason I'll get to how to fix that in a second. Yeah, if you want this to read a lot more like a spell, you should add some sort of like either faint smoke. Like, first of all, the pendant has to be way bigger. There's too many feathers. If you're gonna add a lot of feathers, like you can add a couple around and then some others like floating around her. I can see that you try to do that because there's a couple here. And there's another thing I just reminded that I want to mention to you to how to help you with your overall detail. But yeah, I would add some like smoke first, something simple looking that looks like a spell or whatever coming out of a much bigger pendant than this, and then you add like 1 or maybe 2 crows, or actually up to 3 is fine. But I would worry that maybe you wouldn't be able to like handle that, because the more you add the worse it is. Like right now, this is totally not working. There's way too many crows, and I can tell that you don't know how to draw crows either. I don't know if you use reference or not. Maybe to some of these, a couple maybe look like you may have reference, but I would that's gonna be my last point, reference. But yeah, add something like simple looking, like a spell mist or whatever, and then like 1 up to 3 crows at max. That have a nice simple shape to them, and we'll create like another focal point, and we can tell, oh, it's coming out of the pendant. It's sort of a spell or something. Going back to the detail, now that I can zoom in, I can tell a little better that when you draw things like feathers, I can tell, and not just feathers, but overall, I can tell that you do this scratchy thing. Like, avoid doing that. I would suggest instead, it's much better to draw the shape, like the outline of or the silhouette of a feather or whatever it is, a detailed silhouette that has many like scratchy looking surfaces. You want to simplify it a little bit, and you want to just draw the outline, and then instead of the shading part, do not scratch it. So you want to shade it softly first, like it would be almost like a gradient. um, the scratchiness or the little strands you're trying to do here and there, especially here, I can tell, like these little strands that you're doing, that should be like only 10% of the whole, like of the whole image or the whole crow. There should be only like 10, maybe max 20% of just scratchiness. But most of the feathers or most of the form comes from actual like shading that it's not scratchy looking. It's just special, like hair, fur, anything that has a very jagged edge. I can tell that newer or younger artists, not younger in the sense of age, but in the sense of like when you started doing art seriously, myself included, I used to do this all the time, and the effect of just drawing, like you pretty much just shade, or you draw the outline, then you shade the inside, and then only in the details you want to add a couple of like strands here and there. It's gonna look way better. So yeah, avoid these like scratchy looking, not just feathers, but anywhere else in the render. Again, render isn't incredibly important, but I feel like in your case it could help a little bit. Oh, one last thing about render that I see you do well in a few areas, but not so well in others. You should follow the form or the direction of whatever you shade. So instead of shaving, shade. Instead of shaving, you should shade. What are you doing? You're not doing it correctly. Ignore my image for a second. This is what we're going to be working on. I'll show you a quick example here. I'll show you a quick example. So let's say you have a cylinder, right? So when you're shading with your pencil, right now you're doing this. Which I get it, because this is longer than taller, so it feels like the direction would be to the sides, right? And if this was standing, I haven't drawn today, so you probably would think that you should shade like that. With the pencil, I mean, generally speaking, this is not wrong. You want to do a combo. So what I mean by that is initially you should counter shade, which is you shade against, or you shade along the form instead of, fuck, I don't know how to describe this in words. I guess you go against the form, or you go against the direction initially. That's what I wanted to say. So you shade like that, like in this direction, right? And then once you've done that, let me, I'll do a little example here, right? Let's say you've done this, and then you've done that, right? Then you can go after and do a little bit of detail going across it, and you can have the crisscross as much as you want, but it should always follow the it should always follow the shape that you have on. If you want to do a cross contour thing, sometimes I would suggest doing cross contour. Sometimes I would suggest just having one of. I don't really know how to explain to you which one is better when. It's just a matter of experience. But that's what I mean as far as like when you're shading with the pencil. I can see that you're doing that in a few cases, and maybe the reason why I don't see in other areas is because maybe you don't understand form well enough to know which way you should go. But generally, that's what I would suggest. And I mean, the backgrounds, I would avoid tangents. So for example, and this is my last comment and we're done, which is the clouds behind the cape are creating a weird tangent. So a tangent is when like two forms, two lines, or two shapes get so close to one another that they sort of like blend in, It's like I have my hand here, and then if my hand is like like that, you can see that my hand is still behind and this one is in front. But if I try to put my hand in front of my other hand, suddenly, at a silhouette level, these two are merging together. My left hand and my right hand are one. And this is how in your image, in a couple of places, you have that going on. Not everywhere, but here and there. Actually, like for example, the tip of the feather here. This one is not too bad, but like I definitely would have the pendant go like maybe like in this empty space. Like the tips of the fabric, for example. I don't know, there's like a couple of areas. Those are the ones that first stand out to me. And because you have so many, once or twice is fine to have that. It's nearly impossible not to have one, especially on a busy image. However, you want to avoid it as much as possible. Having a couple, like 1, 2 is fine, but like the more you have, the more it becomes apparent. And that's it. That concludes my critique for Chaos. Clap it up, boys. Don't forget, chat, that subs, tier 1 subs can request art reviews and portfolio reviews. And tier 2 subs is very, very new, very, very recent. We just opened up for tier 2 paintovers, which is a combination of me critiquing, but I'm actually changing your image and showing you what it is that I would do. So thank you for watching. See you on the next one.